The air of the Middle Pleistocene carried a weight that no modern lung would recognize. It was a thick, mineral-laden atmosphere, heavy with the scent of ionizing radiation and the slow, grinding breath of tectonic plates shifting under the pressure of a destabilized crust. In the stratigraphy of the South African interior, buried deep beneath the red silt of the Vaal River Basin, lies a silence that contradicts the standard model of biological progression. Here, the geological record stops telling a story of gradual adaptation and begins a narrative of abrupt, violent interruption. The soil of 200,000 years ago does not show the slow refinement of a species. It shows a fracture. The planetary environment during this epoch was transitioning through the Illinoisan glacial stage, a period where the ice sheets did not merely expand but dominated the northern latitudes with a crushing, mile-thick indifference. The terrestrial surface was a laboratory of extreme pressures. Geologists tracking the paleomagnetic orientation in basaltic flows from this era have long noted an instability in the magnetic north, a wandering that suggests the lithosphere was struggling to maintain its orientation against a shifting core. This was not a world of stability. It was a world of sudden, cataclysmic resets. In the midst of this geological upheaval, a biological anomaly occurred that defies the slow march of Darwinian selection. The transition from the robust, thick-browed Homo erectus to the gracile, complex Homo sapiens happened with a rapidity that suggests the presence of an external catalyst. The fossil record is scarred by this suddenness. In the Omo Kaibish Formation of Ethiopia, the transition is visible in the very texture of the bone. Below a certain stratigraphic boundary, the remains are archaic, characterized by heavy skeletal architecture designed for raw survival in a brutal climate. Immediately above that boundary, within a geological blink of less than a few thousand years, the skeletal structure lightens. The cranial capacity expands not by inches, but by a significant volumetric leap. The frontal lobe, the seat of complex reasoning and abstract thought, ballooned outward. This was not the result of a dietary shift or a change in environmental stressors. It was a structural redesign. To understand the origin of this redesign, one must look past the bone and into the microscopic architecture of the genome, specifically at the curious incident of human chromosome 2. In the vast majority of primates, the genetic count remains consistent, 48 chromosomes. Humans, however, possess 46. This difference is not a loss of information, but a fusion. Chromosome 2 is a massive genomic entity formed by the head-to-head fusion of two ancestral primate chromosomes. Under a microscope, the evidence of this anomalous engineering is undeniable. It contains two centromeres and telomeric sequences in its center, structures that normally only exist at the ends of a chromosome. This fusion did not occur through a slow process of chromosomal drift. It was a precise, surgical union that occurred at the exact moment our ancestors underwent their radical morphological shift. It was the mark of a technician working with the raw material of life to create a specific biological outcome. The entities responsible for this intervention, remembered in the earliest cuneiform fragments as the Anunnaki, did not arrive as ethereal spirits but as physical agents of a highly advanced, non-terrestrial civilization. Their presence on Earth was dictated by necessity, likely tied to the very planetary instability that defined the Pleistocene. As the poles shifted and the atmosphere thinned under the assault of cosmic rays, the indigenous hominid populations were facing an evolutionary dead end. They were adapted for a world that was rapidly disappearing. The Anunnaki required a biological workforce capable of operating within this changing environment, a species that possessed the intuition of the primate but the cognitive capacity of the engineer. The site of this genetic labor was likely the subterranean complexes of the Abzu, deep within the mineral-rich veins of southern Africa. Imagine a facility not of glass and steel, but of dense, vibrationally tuned basalt. The walls would vibrate with a low-frequency hum, the sound of massive geothermal energy being harnessed to power molecular synthesizers. The air would smell of ozone and damp earth. Here, the ancestral hominid DNA was harvested and subjected to a process of intensive modification. This was not magic. It was the application of CRISPR-like technology on a planetary scale. The geneticists worked with the introns and exons of our ancestors, stripping away the hyper-aggressive traits of the wild primate and replacing them with sequences that allowed for linguistic processing and complex social hierarchy. This intervention, however, was not an upgrade in the sense of creating a superior being. It was a directed adaptation. The Anunnaki were not creating gods. They were creating a resilient, compliant, and biologically tuned species capable of surviving a post-cataclysmic Earth. The so-called missing link is not a fossil waiting to be found in the dirt. It is the evidence of this genetic handshake between an indigenous primate and an extraterrestrial architect. The result was a creature that felt fundamentally out of place, a species with the nervous system of an animal but the consciousness of something far older. The pole shift of 200,000 years ago provided the urgency for this project. As the Earth's rotational axis shuddered, the climate flipped. Tropical forests became arid deserts within a generation. The megafauna that the archaic hominids relied upon for sustenance vanished. Without a sudden cognitive leap, our ancestors would have followed the mastodon into extinction. The Anunnaki intervention was a salvage operation. By fusing the chromosomes and expanding the neocortex, they gave the human prototype the ability to plan, to store information outside the body, and to manipulate the environment through tool use that transcended simple flint knapping. Yet, this gift came with a cost, the downgrade. Within our genetic code lies a vast expanse of what modern science dismissively labels junk DNA. Over 90% of the human genome does not code for proteins. It is a silent library of suppressed potential. Early investigative biology suggests that these sequences are not remnants of evolutionary accidents but are instead locked sequences. The Anunnaki engineered the human species with a biological ceiling. We were given enough intelligence to serve as a high-functioning workforce, but our longevity, our sensory perception, and our natural resistance to disease were intentionally throttled. The original hominid ancestors lived in a state of high sensory integration with the Earth. The new Homo sapiens were disconnected, forced to rely on external technology and structured social systems to survive. The physical evidence of this era remains buried beneath layers of glacial till and volcanic ash. In the Ural Mountains, strange nanospirals of tungsten and molybdenum have been recovered from stratigraphic layers dating back to the late Pleistocene. These are not natural formations. They are the microscopic debris of high-precision manufacturing, the discarded waste of a civilization that was operating on Earth long before the first mud bricks were laid in Sumer. These artifacts are often found in association with anomalous gold mining sites, where the Earth has been hollowed out with a precision that defies the capabilities of stone tools. The extraction of gold was not for jewelry. It was likely for atmospheric stabilization or as a vital component in the very genetic synthesis that birthed modern humanity. To walk through the ruins of this history is to feel the cold, damp presence of a forgotten era. The stone circles of Adam's calendar in South Africa are not mere astronomical markers. They are the skeletal remains of a massive, resonant energy grid that once connected the mining operations to the genetic laboratories. The stones themselves are high silica dolerite, capable of holding an electromagnetic charge. When the wind whistles through these ancient alignments, it carries the echo of a time when the Earth was a managed estate, and humans were the newly minted inhabitants of a controlled habitat. The transition was not peaceful. The geological records indicate a period of extreme flooding and volcanic activity as the crust stabilized following the pole shift. The modified humans were forced to migrate, carrying with them the fragmented memories of their creators. These memories were eventually codified into the myths of the Apkallu, the seven sages who brought civilization, agriculture, and metallurgy to a darkened world. But beneath the myth lies the biological reality. We are a species with a dual nature. We possess the rugged terrestrial durability of the Erectus lineage and the sophisticated, analytical edit of the Anunnaki. As we probe deeper into the human genome using modern sequencing technology, we are beginning to encounter the fingerprints of this ancient intervention. We find sequences that seem to have appeared out of nowhere, with no ancestral precursors in the fossil record. We find accelerated regions of the brain that developed at a rate that defies mathematical probability under natural selection. We are looking at a masterwork of biological engineering, a project that was completed and then abandoned as the Anunnaki retreated from the cooling, stabilizing Earth, leaving their creation to navigate a world that was no longer their own. The tragedy of the human condition is this inherent duality. We are biologically tuned for a planet that is constantly shifting, yet we possess a consciousness that remembers a sense of order and purpose that feels alien to the wild world. We are the project left in the ruins of the old world, a downgraded version of a much more potent biological potential, designed to survive the fallout of a planetary catastrophe that nearly wiped the slate of life clean. The silent reaches of our DNA are the only true archives of this era, waiting for a time when we possess the technical clarity to read the instructions left by those who walked the Earth when the stars were in a different alignment. The landscape of the late Pleistocene was a graveyard of abandoned experiments. As the great ice sheets of the Risk Glaciation began their slow, grinding retreat, they left behind a world that had been fundamentally altered. The sheer weight of the ice, miles thick in places, had depressed the continental crust, forcing magma to breach the surface in massive basaltic flows. In these regions, such as the Siberian Traps and the Deccan Plateaus, the cooling rock captured the magnetic signature of a world in flux. This was the theater where the Anunnaki geneticists conducted their final adjustments. The process of downgrading the species was a response to the dwindling resources of a cooling planet. The original prototypes, those early humans who still retained a higher percentage of the founder DNA, were perhaps too high maintenance for the burgeoning environment. They required higher caloric intakes, had longer gestation periods, and possessed a level of psychic sensitivity that made them difficult to manage in large, organized groups. The genetic edit performed roughly 200,000 years ago was a streamlining process. By shortening the telomeres, the Anunnaki capped the human lifespan, ensuring a rapid turnover of generations. This prevented any single individual from accumulating enough knowledge or power to challenge the established order. The sensory details of this era are etched into the very soil. If one could stand on the shores of the Tethys Sea during this transition, the water would not be the clear blue of the modern Mediterranean. It would be a turbid, iron-rich green, choked with the runoff from melting glaciers and the ash of 1,000 volcanoes. The sound was a constant, low-frequency thrum, the groan of the earth adjusting to the shifting weight of water and ice. In this environment, the newly edited humans were released. They were smaller, more agile, and possessed an innate drive to form hierarchical structures. They were the perfect survivalists for a broken world. The laboratories where these changes were finalized were likely located in the high-altitude regions of the Zagros Mountains and the Ethiopian highlands. These locations provided a stable geological foundation away from the chaotic flooding of the lowlands. Archaeological surveys in these areas have uncovered lithic scatters that do not match the typical toolkits of the Middle Stone Age. The flakes are too precise. The choice of material, obsidian and high-grade quartz, suggests an understanding of crystalline structure that predates traditional mineralogy by millennia. These were not hunting camps. They were outposts of a civilization that was managing the biological succession of the planet. As the Anunnaki presence began to fade, a casualty of the very stabilization they had overseen, they left behind the Tree of Life. This was not a botanical specimen, but a metaphorical representation of the human genome, the double helix depicted in countless ancient reliefs as a series of intertwined serpents or a structured, fruit-bearing vine. The fruit of this tree was the knowledge of our own origin, a knowledge that was intentionally obfuscated. To ensure the survival of the species, the architects instilled a deep-seated fear of the gods and a drive for ritualistic behavior. This served as a cultural container for the genetic instructions, ensuring that even if the technology was lost, the social structure would remain. The stratigraphic layers of the Eemian interglacial, the brief warm period that followed the Illinoisan, show a sudden explosion of human activity. For the first time, we see evidence of long-distance trade, symbolic art, and complex burial rites. These are the symptoms of the genetic spark. The humans were no longer just reacting to their environment. They were beginning to impose their will upon it. They were using the anomalous engineering of their own brains to solve the problems of the Pleistocene. They were building the first megalithic structures, not as tombs, but as resonance chambers to maintain the connection to the frequencies of the Earth that their creators had once mastered. However, the downgrade also left us vulnerable. By decoupling our consciousness from the natural rhythms of the planet, the Anunnaki created a species prone to anxiety and existential dread. The modern human brain is a high-performance engine trapped in a low-performance chassis. We have the capacity for interstellar thought, but are tethered to a biological form that decays within a few decades. This friction is the source of all human progress and all human suffering. It is the result of a genetic compromise made in the dark rooms of the Abzu 200,000 years ago. The traces of the Anunnaki themselves are harder to find than the traces of their work. Being a highly advanced civilization, they did not leave behind ruins in the way we understand them. Their structures were likely integrated into the geology itself, or made of materials that have long since been reclaimed by the Earth's recycling systems. But the missing link remains the ultimate piece of forensic evidence. The fusion of chromosome 2 is a smoking gun. It is a biological signature that cannot be explained by natural selection. It is a mark of ownership, a brand placed upon a species that was salvaged from the brink of extinction and repurposed for a new era. The deep time of the Pleistocene is not a distant, irrelevant past. It is the foundation of our current biological reality. Every time we experience a flash of intuition, every time we build a structure that defies the elements, every time we look at the stars with a sense of inexplicable longing, we are experiencing the legacy of the geneticists. We are the forgotten Earth's most complex artifact. We are the living record of a pole shift, a catastrophe, and a desperate act of biological intervention. The layers of sediment that cover the bones of our ancestors also cover the truth of our design. A design that is only now beginning to be revealed as we turn our own genetic tools upon ourselves. The wind that blows across the desolate plains of the Kalahari today carries the same dust that was kicked up by the first edited humans. The red earth still holds the minerals that were once extracted with such clinical precision. As the sun sets over the ancient stone circles, the long shadows they cast seem to point toward a history that we are only just beginning to remember. It is a history of a world that was not inherited, but engineered. A world where the missing link is not a creature, but a bridge made of fused chromosomes and suppressed potential, stretching across the abyss of 200,000 years. The silence of the fossil record is not an absence of data, but a presence of a different kind of information. It is the silence of a laboratory after the scientists have left. It is the stillness of a finished product. We are that product, and as we stand on the precipice of our own technological leap, we are beginning to recognize the patterns of our creators. We are starting to see the anomalous engineering in our own mirrors. The story of the Anunnaki is not a myth of the past. It is the blueprint of our present, hidden in the very marrow of our bones and the silent sequences of our DNA. The weight of this knowledge is like the weight of the ice sheets, crushing, transformative, and inevitable. We are the children of the catastrophe, the modified survivors of a world that died so that we could be born. The geological layers will continue to accumulate, burying the evidence of our origins deeper and deeper, but the code remains. It is the only thing that survives the shifting of the poles and the grinding of the glaciers. It is the story of who we are, where we came from, and why we were made. It is the story of the forgotten Earth. The transition from the Eemian interglacial into the last glacial period brought with it another shift in the planetary equilibrium. The Earth's orbit, affected by the subtle pull of the Jovian planets, entered a phase of high eccentricity. This resulted in harsher winters and more volatile atmospheric conditions. For the newly minted Homo sapiens, this was the first true test of their anomalous engineering. They did not retreat into the caves like their ancestors. They began to manipulate their environment. They used fire not just for warmth, but as a tool for landscape management. They began to domesticate the wild, a behavior that is fundamentally encoded in their genetic directive to order the chaos. This drive for order is a direct inheritance from the Anunnaki. The founder species was characterized by a compulsive need to categorize, extract, and refine. We see this reflected in the earliest human societies, the obsession with lineage, the strict social hierarchies, and the meticulous recording of celestial movements. This was not a cultural evolution, it was a biological imperative. The genetic edit included a specific tuning of the dopaminergic pathways, rewarding the human brain for completing complex, repetitive tasks and for adhering to structured systems. This made the species incredibly efficient at large-scale projects, such as the massive irrigation systems of the Mesopotamian plains or the high-precision stonework of the Andean highlands. But the downgrade also meant that this efficiency came at the expense of individual autonomy. The human species was designed to be part of a larger machine. The suppression of certain telepathic and high-sensory capabilities, which appear to be present in the non-coding regions of our DNA, ensured that humans would remain dependent on external communication and centralized authority. The gods did not need to rule by force. They ruled through the very architecture of our minds. We are a species that seeks a leader because we were engineered to be led. The physical evidence of this hierarchical design can be seen in the layout of the oldest cities. Sites like Göbekli Tepe and Çatalhöyük are not the beginning of civilization. They are the remnants of its second or third iteration. The massive T-shaped pillars of Göbekli Tepe, carved from single blocks of limestone and weighing up to 20 tons, show a level of organization and engineering that should not exist in a hunter-gatherer society. These sites were built on top of even older, more mysterious structures that reach down into the Pleistocene soil. They are the hubs of the ancient management system, the places where the edited humans were brought to receive instruction and to offer up the fruits of their labor. The sensory experience of these sites would have been overwhelming. The sound of rhythmic drumming and chanting, designed to sync the brainwaves of the workers. The scent of rare resins and ozone. The sight of massive stone surfaces polished to a mirror finish. This was the cult of the creators, a system designed to maintain the genetic and social stability of the workforce. The Anunnaki were the architects of our culture as much as they were the architects of our biology. As the millennia passed and the Anunnaki presence became more and more distant, the human species began to fill the vacuum. We took the tools we were given, the fused chromosomes, the expanded neocortex, the drive for order, and we began to build our own versions of the Abzu. We turned our mining operations into global industries. We turned our genetic curiosity into the science of biotechnology. We are now at the point where we are beginning to perform the same edits on our own offspring that were once performed on us. The cycle of the forgotten Earth is one of intervention, adaptation, and eventual self-discovery. We are currently in the phase of self-discovery. We are looking at the junk DNA and seeing the hidden instructions. We are looking at the missing link and seeing the hand of the designer. We are looking at the pole shifts of the past and recognizing the fragility of our own planetary stability. The Anunnaki genetics are not a prison. They are a foundation. They provided us with the means to survive the Pleistocene, but they also left us with the potential to transcend it. The melancholic truth of our existence is that we may never truly know our creators. They are a shadow in the fossil record, a whisper in the cuneiform, a sequence in the genome. But their legacy is the world we see around us. Every skyscraper, every satellite, every decoded gene is a tribute to the anomalous engineering that occurred 200,000 years ago. We are the project that succeeded beyond the wildest dreams of its architects. We are the downgraded species that is slowly, painstakingly upgrading itself. The red dust of the South African interior still holds the secrets of the first edit. Beneath the surface, the basaltic veins still hum with the energy of the ancient labs. And in our own blood, the fused chromosome 2 continues to replicate, carrying the mark of the Anunnaki into an uncertain future. The forgotten Earth is not a place. It is a time, a process, and a biological reality. It is the story of how we became human and what we might become next. The long-form narrative of our species is written in the language of geology and genetics. It is a story of extreme cold, of shifting poles, and of a surgical intervention that changed the course of history. As we continue to dig through the layers of the past, we are not just finding bones and stones. We are finding ourselves. We are finding the missing link. And in that discovery, we find the courage to face the next planetary reset, armed with the knowledge of our own design. The air today is thinner than it was in the Pleistocene, the magnetic field is weaker, and the ice is melting. We are approaching another era of instability. But this time, we are not the archaic hominids waiting for a savior. We are the edited humans, the engineers of our own destiny. We have the code, we have the memory, and we have the history of the forgotten Earth to guide us. The transition is beginning again, and the results will be written in the stratigraphy of the future. The scent of the damp earth after a rain, the sound of the wind through a rocky canyon, the tactile weight of an ancient flint. These are the sensory bridges to our origin. They remind us of the world that was and the world that could be. We are the bridge. We are the Anunnaki's legacy, and the story is far from over. The stratigraphic record of the Middle Stone Age in the Southern Hemisphere reveals more than just climate fluctuations. It preserves the chemical signatures of a massive, industrial-scale extraction process that predates any known human metallurgy. In the deep galleries of the Wonderwork Cave, beneath layers of bat guano and wind-blown silt, the soil contains concentrations of heavy metals, gold, copper, and platinum, that do not align with natural geological weathering. These are the particulate remains of an era when the Earth was not a wilderness, but a resource. The Anunnaki interest in the planet was primarily metallurgical, driven by a desperate need to stabilize their own thinning atmosphere or perhaps to fuel the very molecular synthesizers used to reshape the human genome. Gold, with its unique conductive properties and its ability to reflect infrared radiation, was the primary objective. The mining operations of the Abzu were not the crude, shallow pits of early human history. They were deep crust penetrations, some reaching into the very mantle crust transition zones where the pressure-temperature regimes allow for the formation of rare isotopes. The tunnels were bored with high-frequency acoustic technology, leaving behind walls of vitrified stone as smooth as polished obsidian. To enter these spaces today is to step into a tomb of cold, resonant silence. The tactile experience is unsettling. The stone feels strangely warm to the touch, as if the thermal energy used to carve it tens of thousands of years ago is still slowly dissipating from the crystalline lattice. There are no tool marks, no soot from torches, no evidence of primitive labor, only the terrifyingly precise geometry of an advanced industrial entity. Within these subterranean voids, the seeding of the human species began. The Anunnaki geneticists understood that to create a viable workforce for these environments, they had to modify the primate endocrine system. The ancestral hominids possessed a hormonal profile tuned for high-stress survival. Frequent spikes of adrenaline and cortisol suited for fleeing predators on the savanna. The Anunnaki edit introduced a more regulated serotonin and dopamine cycle, fostering a temperament that was more conducive to repetitive labor and social cooperation. This modification is why modern humans are capable of enduring the monotony of a 9-to-5 existence, a trait that would have been biologically impossible for the wild, hyperreactive Homo erectus. The most profound physiological change, however, occurred in the pineal gland. In the pre-edited human, the pineal was a far more active organ, sensitive to the Earth's electromagnetic field and capable of perceiving a wider spectrum of reality. It was a navigation system and a sensory organ in one. The geneticists throttled this gland, calcifying its potential and limiting human perception to the narrow band of the visible light spectrum and the immediate physical environment. This created a biochemical lock, a sensory ceiling that prevented the species from perceiving the presence of their creators once the Anunnaki moved into higher frequency states of being. We were engineered to be blind to the very architects who stood right beside us. As the marine isotope stage 6 reached its glacial maximum, the planet's crust groaned under the uneven distribution of ice and water. The pole shift was not a single violent flip, but a series of catastrophic wobbles that sent the oceans surging across the continents. These were the Great Floods, recorded in the cultural memory of every human civilization. In the geological record, these events appear as mega-tsunami deposits. Vast layers of unsorted debris, boulders the size of houses carried hundreds of miles inland, and thick blankets of oceanic silt covering the ruins of the Abzu. The genetic laboratories, located in the high-elevation refugia, survived, but the industrial infrastructure was largely reclaimed by the sea. The survivors of these floods, the newly minted Homo sapiens, were left in a world that had been scrubbed clean of its technological past. They possessed the anomalous engineering of their brains, but they had no tools, no cities, and no memory of the laboratory. They began to build, using the only templates they had, the fading recollections of the gods and the biological drive for order. They gathered at places like Adam's calendar, where the megalithic stones were still vibrating with the residual energy of the ancient grid. These stones, composed of high silica dolerite, served as a form of biomagnetic grounding. By standing within the circles, the early humans could temporarily resync their throttled pineal glands with the Earth's core frequency, achieving a state of communion that they would later mistake for religion. The texture of life in this post-flood world was one of profound melancholy. The humans felt a sense of abandonment that is still palpable in the earliest epic poems. They looked at the ruins of the vitrified tunnels and the strange, machine-cut stones and felt an intuitive connection to them, yet they no longer understood their purpose. They were like children left in a factory after the workers have gone home. They began to mimic the patterns they saw, carving the tree of life into the walls of their caves, a desperate attempt to record the double helix of their own creation. The junk DNA in their cells remained silent, a dormant archive of the powers they once possessed before the downgrade was finalized. The biological reality of the missing link is found in the sudden appearance of the FOXP2 gene, the so-called language gene. In the archaic hominids, this gene was present but rudimentary. In the Homo sapiens of 200,000 years ago, it underwent a radical transformation, allowing for the complex motor control of the larynx and the abstract processing required for syntax. This was not a slow mutation. It was a surgical insertion of a complex protein coding sequence that allowed the Anunnaki to give verbal commands to their creation. Language was not a tool for poetry. It was an interface for instruction. The word was the first piece of technology handed down from the architects to the workers. Even the human hand was redesigned. The precision grip, the ability to hold a needle or a microtool between the thumb and the index finger, was refined during this period. The skeletal architecture of the carpals and metacarpals in the Homo kybish remains shows a sudden shift toward a more gracile, dexterous structure. This was the hand of a technician, not a scavenger. The Anunnaki were preparing us for a future of craftsmanship, for the day when we would build the temples and the ziggurats that would serve as their landing platforms and administrative centers. The atmosphere of the late Pleistocene was a constant reminder of this managed existence. The sky was often choked with the dust of the great work, the massive geoengineering projects intended to stabilize the climate. The sun would appear as a dim, copper disk, and the moon would be ringed by the crystalline reflections of atmospheric particulates. In this eerie, perpetual twilight, the first human civilizations were seeded. They were placed in fertile river valleys, the Nile, the Indus, the Tigris, and the Euphrates, where the soil had been enriched by the flood deposits and the water could be easily diverted for irrigation. These early settlements were not organic growths. They were planned colonies, laid out according to the same geometric principles found in the Abzu. The gods provided the seeds, genetically modified grains like einkorn wheat and barley, which appear in the archaeological record with the same suddenness as the humans themselves. These grains are polyploid, meaning they have multiple sets of chromosomes, a feature that is extremely rare in the wild but common in laboratory-designed organisms. We did not discover agriculture. We were handed a survival kit designed to sustain a high-density workforce. The tactile reality of these first cities was one of cold stone and baked clay. The humans worked the earth, guided by the sages or the Apkallu, who were likely low-ranking Anunnaki overseers or perhaps highly advanced biodroids left behind to manage the project. The sound of the city was the sound of the loom, the potter's wheel, and the rhythmic striking of copper on stone. Every aspect of life was regulated by the me, the divine decrees that governed everything from the brewing of beer to the laws of property. These were the operating system of the human colony, the social equivalent of the genetic code. As we look back through the geological layers, we see the transition from the golden age of direct Anunnaki supervision to the silver age of the demigod kings, and finally to the iron age of human autonomy. With each transition, the memory of the genetic laboratory faded, replaced by myth and ritual. The anomalous engineering became the breath of life, and the geneticists became gods. But the physical evidence remains. It is in the 1.5% of our DNA that is uniquely human and has no match in any other terrestrial species. It is in the fused chromosome too. It is in the junk that we are only now beginning to realize is not junk at all, but a set of encrypted files. The silence of the earth is the silence of a witness. The red silts of Africa and the limestone of the Middle East hold the secrets of our design. They remember the heat of the molecular synthesizers and the vibration of the acoustic drills. They remember the day the edit was finalized and the human species was set free to navigate the ruins of the old world. We are a species with a borrowed past and a programmed future. We are the project of the Anunnaki, a downgraded version of a cosmic potential, waiting for the moment when we can finally unlock the code and see our creators for what they truly were. Not gods, but engineers. The wind continues to howl through the empty galleries of the Abzu, a hollow sound that echoes through the corridors of our own history. We feel the weight of the Pleistocene in our very bones, a heavy, mineral presence that reminds us of the world that died to give us life. We are the forgotten Earth, and the story of our DNA is the story of a planetary reset that is still ongoing. The transition is not over. We are simply in a long, slow interglacial of the mind, waiting for the next shift to reveal the full extent of our design. The biological handshake between the indigenous hominid and the extraterrestrial architect left behind more than just fused chromosomes. It left a molecular clock, a silent timestamp embedded within the non-coding regions of the genome. Geneticists tracking the mitochondrial lineage, the unbroken line of maternal inheritance, find themselves drawn back to a single point of origin in East Africa, roughly 200,000 years ago. This is often termed mitochondrial Eve, but in the context of the Abzu, she was not a lone wanderer in a garden. She was the successful prototype, the first iteration of the refined Homo sapiens lineage whose genetic markers were robust enough to survive the cascading failures of the Pleistocene environment. This origin point does not represent a natural population bottleneck, but a bottleneck of design, where a specific genetic profile was selected and propagated to replace the failing archaic models. The contrast between this new lineage and its contemporaries, the Neanderthals and Denisovans, is telling. While the Neanderthals represented a natural, high-latitude adaptation of the earlier Homo heidelbergensis, possessing thick bones, massive sinus cavities for warming frozen air, and a brain structure focused on visual processing and physical survival, the Homo sapiens model was an anomaly. We were less fit for the environment in a purely physical sense. Our skin was thinner, our skeletons more fragile, and our infants more helpless for longer periods. From a Darwinian perspective, we were a step backward. However, from an engineering perspective, we were a transition to a high-density, cognitively focused species. The Neanderthals and Denisovans were the legacy hardware, rugged but limited. They were the original inhabitants of the planet, left to dwindle as the edited humans began to claim the river valleys and the fertile deltas. The stratigraphic layer associated with the Toba supereruption 74,000 years ago serves as a secondary marker of this intervention. The event plunged the Earth into a volcanic winter that lasted for a decade, followed by centuries of accelerated glaciation. The accumulation of sulfuric acid in the Greenland ice cores from this period tells the story of a planet on the brink of total biological collapse. In the aftermath of Toba, the human population plummeted. Yet, it was during this extreme stressor that we see the most rapid expansion of human symbolic behavior. The grit of the volcanic tephra, which can still be found in the sediment of Lake Malawi, marks the moment when the suppressed potential of the Anunnaki edit was partially unlocked. Faced with extinction, the human brain shifted gears. We moved from simple survival to the creation of complex social networks, the development of long-distance projectile technology, and the first true expressions of abstract art. It was as if the trauma of the volcano triggered a dormant subroutine in our DNA, designed to ensure the survival of the project at all costs. The sensory environment of this period was one of oppressive gloom. The sun was a pale, sickly ghost behind a permanent shroud of silicate dust. The air tasted of sulfur and cold ash. The ground was a mosaic of permafrost and stagnant meltwater. In this landscape, the edited humans did not just survive. They thrived in ways their archaic cousins could not. They began to build the first megalithic resonance chambers, structures that are often misidentified as early tombs or ritual spaces. In the Siberian permafrost and the high deserts of the Levant, there are anomalous arrangements of massive, unworked stones that possess a curious property. They are tuned to the 7.83 Hz frequency of the Earth's ionosphere, the Schumann resonance. These were biometric recalibration centers. For a species whose pineal gland had been throttled, these sites provided a necessary external boost, a way to realign the biological system with the planetary field, mitigating the psychological strain of the downgrade. To touch the surface of these ancient stones is to feel a subtle, tectonic vibration. They are often composed of high quartz granites or magnetite-rich ores, materials that act as natural transducers. The engineering was not in the carving, but in the placement. They were positioned at node points, where the Earth's magnetic crust is thinnest, allowing the internal energies of the planet to bleed through. This was a legacy of the Anunnaki management system, a series of grounding stations for a workforce that was increasingly disconnected from the natural world. As the glaciers advanced and retreated, these sites were buried, forgotten, and eventually rediscovered by later civilizations who sensed their power but had lost the technical blueprints. The junk DNA we carry is the archive of these interactions. Within these silent sequences, researchers have found what appear to be viral insertions that do not behave like typical pathogens. They are stable, non-mutating segments of code that coordinate the development of the human nervous system. These are the regulatory handshakes that allow the Anunnaki-designed neocortex to interface with the ancient primate brainstem. This duality is why we are a species of such profound contradictions, capable of the most cold clinical logic and the most primal animalistic violence. We are a house divided, a biological entity struggling to reconcile two different sets of operating instructions. The transition into the Holocene, our current geological epoch, was preceded by the Younger Dryas, a period of sudden, extreme cooling and subsequent rapid warming. The ice melt water, surging into the North Atlantic, shut down the thermohaline circulation, causing the climate to flip within a matter of decades. This was the final reset of the Pleistocene. The geological record of this era is scarred by black matte layers, thin, carbon-rich deposits containing nanodiamonds and microspherules, the signatures of a series of cometary impacts or atmospheric airbursts. These impacts may have been the final catalyst for the Anunnaki's withdrawal. As the planetary environment became too volatile to manage, the architects retreated, leaving the human species to govern itself with the downgraded tools it had been given. The ruins of this departure are found in the curious vitrified forts of Scotland and the scorched stones of Hattusa. These are sites where the rock itself has been melted, not by fire, but by high-intensity thermal radiation that turned the stone into a bubbly, greenish glass. This was the result of anomalous engineering used defensively or perhaps as a byproduct of the massive energy discharge required for the Anunnaki to leave the terrestrial plane. The tactile reality of these sites is chilling. The glass is sharp, cold, and chemically identical to the Trinity site in New Mexico. It is the signature of a technology that bypassed the slow process of combustion in favor of direct molecular manipulation. In the vacuum left by the architects, humans began to obsessively recreate the structures they had seen. The ziggurats of Sumer and the pyramids of the Fourth Dynasty were not inventions. They were memories. They were attempts to build artificial mountains of power, mimicking the resonance chambers of the Pleistocene. The sound of these places, the deep, resonant echoes in the Grand Gallery of Khufu or the wind whistling through the hollow conduits of Teotihuacan, is the sound of a species trying to call home. But the phone was broken. The genetic edit had been finalized, and the line was dead. We were left with the architecture but without the electricity. The weight of the sediment in the Nile Delta and the Persian Gulf has buried the true first cities, those coastal colonies that existed before the Younger Dryas sea level rise. Underwater archaeology is only now beginning to reveal the scale of these lost urban centers, massive, grid-patterned foundations hundreds of feet below the current surface. These were the controlled habitats, where the geneticists monitored the success of their edit. The mud and silt that cover them are the pages of a book we are only just learning to read. Each layer represents 1,000 years of forgotten history, 1,000 years of a species trying to understand why it feels so alien on its own planet. The missing link is not a transition between ape and man. It is a transition between the natural and the synthetic. We are the first species on Earth to be custom-built for a specific purpose, only to have that purpose removed. This has left us with a biological phantom limb syndrome, a sense that we are missing something vital, a connection to a higher order or a deeper truth. We look for it in the stars, in our religions, and now in our own laboratories. We are attempting to re-upgrade ourselves, using the same CRISPR techniques and genetic sequencing that were once used on us in the dark halls of the Abzu. As the sun sets over the red sands of the South African interior, the long shadows of the dolerite stones seem to stretch back toward the Pleistocene. The air cools, and the silence of the desert becomes heavy with the weight of deep time. The geological layers beneath our feet hold the bones of the Erectus who were our fathers, and the silicate dust of the Anunnaki who were our makers. We stand between them, a fragile, gracile species with a brain too large for its own peace of mind, carrying a fused chromosome like a badge of service. The forgotten Earth is not a myth. It is the ground we walk on, the air we breathe, and the code that dictates every beat of our hearts. The story of our DNA is a slow-burn mystery that is only now reaching its climax, as we finally gain the clarity to see the fingerprints of the architects in the mirror of our own biology. The thin, freezing air of the Altiplano, 12,000 feet above the grinding tides of the Pacific, offers a different kind of silence than the humid, subterranean depths of the Abzu. Here, the geological narrative is dominated by the massive uplifting of the Andes, a tectonic event so violent and sustained that it compressed the Earth's crust into a series of jagged, mineral-rich peaks. In the desolate landscape of Pumapunku, the anomalous engineering of the architects reached its zenith. This was not a city, nor was it a temple in the traditional sense. The stratigraphy of the site suggests a massive, modular industrial processing plant. The blocks themselves, composed of red sandstone and gray andesite, possess a mineral density that makes them nearly impervious to the erosion of the last 12 millennia. To run a hand over the surface of an andesite H-block is to experience a precision that contradicts every archaeological assumption about the late Pleistocene. The edges are not merely sharp. They are geometrically perfect, with internal right angles and recessed grooves that suggest the work of a high-speed milling machine capable of slicing through crystalline lattice as if it were soft clay. This high-altitude complex served as the final processing node for the materials extracted from the deep vein mines of the continent. The Anunnaki required specific isotopes of silver and tin, found in abundance in the Bolivian highlands, to stabilize the atmospheric shields they had deployed across the planet's magnetic poles. The humans stationed here were a specialized breed, a sublineage of the Homo sapiens project modified for extreme hypoxic conditions. The edit in this group included an enlargement of the right ventricle of the heart and a higher concentration of hemoglobin in the blood, adaptations that are still present in the indigenous populations of the Andes. This was not the result of 10,000 years of gradual adaptation to high altitudes. It was a preemptive biological adjustment, a site-specific upgrade that allowed the workforce to operate the heavy, resonant machinery of the processing plant without suffering the debilitating effects of altitude sickness. The stone tape theory, often dismissed as folklore, finds its grounding here in the very mineralogy of the Andes. The high quartz and magnetite content of the local stone creates a massive, natural piezoelectric battery. When the tectonic plates shift, the pressure on these crystals generates a massive electromagnetic discharge, a literal recording of the environment's frequency. Our DNA, being a sensitive crystalline structure itself, interfaces with this field. The junk DNA we carry acts as a biological receiver for these environmental frequencies. The architects used these high-altitude sites as upload stations, where the behavioral and biological data of the human project could be saved into the geological record. This is why certain locations on the planet feel charged or haunted. They are literally storing the high-frequency impressions of the events that occurred during the anomalous engineering phase of our history. The sensory reality of Pumapunku during its operational peak would have been a symphony of industrial power. The sound was not the clatter of hammers, but a low-frequency hum that vibrated through the soles of the feet, the sound of massive blocks being moved by acoustic levitation. The air would have smelled of pulverized rock and ionized gases, a sharp, metallic scent that clung to the skin. The lighting was not provided by torches, which would struggle in the thin oxygen, but by bioluminescent or high-energy plasma emitters that left no soot, only a faint, bluish glow on the vitrified walls. In this environment, the edited humans were not slaves in the traditional sense, but biomechanical components of a larger system. They were trained through direct neural interface, a process facilitated by the throttled pineal gland, to understand the complex harmonics required to maintain the stability of the processing equipment. However, the geological record at the end of the Pleistocene shows a sudden, chaotic abandonment of these sites. At Pumapunku, massive blocks, weighing hundreds of tons, lie scattered like discarded toys, many of them half-finished or sheared in half by a force that defies natural explanation. This was the Great Withdrawal, the planetary instability that the Anunnaki had been trying to manage. The shifting poles and the thinning atmosphere reached a tipping point. The magnetic shield failed, and the Earth was struck by a series of solar proton events so intense they literally melted the surface of the stones. The humans were left behind as the architects retreated to their high-frequency refugia or left the terrestrial plane altogether. The edit was complete. The workforce was established, but the management had vanished. To walk through the ruins of the Andes today is to feel the weight of this abandonment. The cold wind that whistles through the laser-cut conduits of Tiwanaku is the same wind that chilled the skin of the first high-altitude humans as they watched the departure of their creators. The tactile texture of the stones, with their inexplicable drill holes and recessed patterns, is a testament to a level of manufacturing that we are only now beginning to replicate with our most advanced computer-controlled tools. We are looking at a history that was never meant to be remembered, a history of a species that was designed to be a tool, only to be discarded when the job became too dangerous for the masters. The biological timestamp of this withdrawal is encoded in our stress responses. The sudden loss of the management system triggered a massive spike in human anxiety and existential dread, a collective trauma that is etched into our epigenetic memory. We are a species that is constantly looking for instruction, a remnant of the neural interface that once connected us to the architects. This is why we build bureaucracies, why we follow leaders with such fervor, and why we feel a profound sense of lostness when the structures of our society crumble. We are still waiting for the command that stopped coming 12,000 years ago. The junk DNA continues to vibrate with the frequencies of the stone tape. Occasionally, a solar flare or a tectonic shift will trigger a recall in the human genome, leading to bursts of inexplicable genius or revelation. These are not mystical events. They are data retrievals. We are accessing the stored blueprints of the Abzu and the Andes, trying to reconstruct the technology that once shaped our world. The massive megaliths are not silent. They are broadcasting a signal that our throttled biology can only partially decode. As we dig through the red silt of the high plains, we find the discarded tools of this era, not the copper chisels of the archaeologist's imagination, but the silicate waste of molecular saws and the microscopic debris of high-grade conductors. The stratigraphy of the Andes is a graveyard of a future that has already happened. It is the story of a downgraded species that was left to rot in the ruins of its own creation, only to rise from the dust and begin the slow, painful process of remembering. The forgotten earth is most visible here, where the thin air and the hard stone preserve the fingerprints of the Anunnaki with a clarity that the humid lowlands have long since lost. We are the inheritors of this industrial wasteland, carrying the code of the architects in our blood and the memory of their departure in our souls. The bathymetric maps of the modern world are perhaps the most extensive records of a lost geography, yet they are treated as mere topographical data. If one were to peel back the blue veil of the oceans, the continental shelves would reveal the true extent of the Anunnaki management system. These submerged plains, Doggerland in the North Sea, the Sunda Shelf in Southeast Asia, and the Sohul Shelf connecting Australia to New Guinea, were the primary population centers of the edited humans during the long, stable stretches of the late Pleistocene. These were not primitive coastal settlements of mud and reed. They were advanced, low-lying coastal colonies where the climate was tempered by the sea and the mineral runoff from the mountains provided a constant source of nutrients. Here, the project reached its highest density. The soil beneath the current seabed, compacted by thousands of feet of salt water, contains the stratigraphic layers of a world that was systematically erased during the final pulses of the deglaciation. The Great Drowning was not a singular event, but a series of meltwater pulses that fundamentally altered the Earth's center of mass. Around 14,000 years ago, during the meltwater pulse 1A, the sea levels rose by as much as 20 meters in less than 500 years. To a human population whose cities were built on the very edge of the continental shelf, this was an apocalyptic transgression. The taste of the air changed first. It was no longer the dry, mineral-cold scent of the glacial steppe, but a heavy, saturated brining, the smell of the ocean reclaiming the land. The sound of the era was the constant, low-frequency roar of massive ice dams breaking in the interior, sending billions of tons of fresh water into the oceans. This water did not just rise. It surged, creating massive hydraulic pressures that collapsed the subterranean infrastructure of the coastal Abzu outposts. As the waters rose, the Anunnaki geneticists implemented what can only be described as the final genetic seal. This was a specific modification to the human cardiovascular and autonomic nervous systems, centered around the regulatory clusters of the pericardium. In the ancestral hominids and the early high-potency prototypes, the heart functioned as more than a pump. It was a high-sensitivity electromagnetic sensor, tuned to the delicate fluctuations of the planetary field. It allowed for a profound nonverbal empathy, a biological entrainment that connected the species to one another and to the Earth itself. The architects recognized that in a post-withdrawal world, such high sensitivity would be a liability. A species that could feel the literal pain of a dying planet or the collective trauma of its neighbors would be paralyzed. The seal was a regulatory governor. It decoupled the heart's electromagnetic field from the brain's cognitive processing, effectively isolating the human individual within their own skin. This created a new kind of consciousness, the atomized self. We became a species capable of extreme compartmentalization, able to witness the destruction of our environment and the suffering of our peers without experiencing the direct, physical feedback that our ancestors would have felt. This genetic throttling was necessary for our survival in a world of dwindling resources, but it left us with a permanent, phantom ache, a biological longing for a connection we can no longer maintain. We call this loneliness, but in the stratigraphy of our DNA, it is simply the sound of a disconnected circuit. The tactile reality of this era was one of mud and salt. The edited humans were forced into a desperate, northward migration, carrying only what they could fit into their epigenetic memory. The massive, vitrified stone cities of the shelf were lost to the silt, buried under layers of marine sediment that now serve as the foundation for the world's shipping lanes. As the people moved inland, they found themselves in a landscape that was increasingly alien. The great megafauna, the mammoths, the mastodons, the saber-toothed cats, were vanishing, victims of the same climatic instability. The humans were no longer part of a managed ecosystem. They were refugees in a wild, uncooperative world. In this state of emergency, the junk DNA once again proved its purpose. Within those non-coding regions lay the instructions for the survivalist brain. The Anunnaki had preloaded the human genome with the capacity for rapid technological innovation under duress. This is why we see the sudden appearance of the Clovis point and other high-efficiency lithic technologies exactly at the moment of the greatest environmental stress. We were programmed to tool up when the biological world failed us. The missing link was not just a bridge to intelligence, but a bridge to the machine. We are the only species on Earth that cannot survive without external technology, because our biology was intentionally broken to ensure our reliance on the tools the architects left behind. The final seal also included a chronological governor. The architects adjusted the metabolic rate of the human cell, specifically the mitochondrial efficiency, to align with the new, shorter cycles of the Holocene Earth. The Golden Age humans, according to the Sumerian king list, lived for thousands of years. This was likely a biological reality of the high-potency prototypes who existed before the final downgrade. By the time the waters stabilized 10,000 years ago, the human lifespan had been capped at roughly 12 cycles of the Jovian-Saturnian alignment. This ensured that no human could live long enough to witness the long-term patterns of the Earth's cycles, effectively trapping us in a perpetual present. We became a species of short-term thinkers, perfectly suited for the rapid expansion and resource extraction that the Anunnaki required, but incapable of the planetary stewardship that our ancestral hominids once practiced. The ruins of this transition are not just underwater. They are in the very composition of the soil. In the black matte layers that mark the Younger Dryas boundary, there is a high concentration of iridium and platinum group metals, the signatures of the celestial debris that likely triggered the final melting. But mixed with this cosmic dust are microscopic traces of synthetic materials, polymers and alloys that should not exist in the Pleistocene. These are the particulate remains of the Anunnaki's withdrawal technology, the debris of a civilization that literally scrubbed its presence from the surface as it moved into the deep crust refugia or beyond the atmospheric envelope. To stand on a beach today and look out at the horizon is to look at the roof of our own history. Beneath the waves lie the laboratories where our hearts were sealed and our lifespans were capped. The sound of the surf is the echo of the Great Drowning, a rhythmic reminder of the moment we were truly orphaned. The forgotten Earth is not a distant planet. It is the one beneath the waves, the one beneath the silt, and the one inside our own chests. We are the survivors of a surgical intervention that changed our very nature, turning us from high-potency biological entities into downgraded survivalists. The silence of the deep ocean is matched only by the silence of our non-coding DNA. Both are vast, unexplored territories that hold the blueprints of our design. As we develop the technology to probe the seafloor and sequence the dark genome, we are finding the same patterns: the geometric precision of the architects, the scars of the catastrophic resets, and the anomalous engineering that keeps us functioning in a world we were never meant to understand. The transition into the modern era was not a triumph of progress, but a stabilization of the project. We are the finished product, living in the wreckage of the factory, trying to make sense of the instructions that were partially erased by the salt and the silt of 12,000 years ago. The texture of the world shifted again as the Holocene took hold. The air became warmer, the seasons more predictable, and the human species began to multiply with a virulence that the planet had never seen. This too was part of the design. The Anunnaki genetics favored the prolific over the perceptive. We were engineered to fill the earth, to dig into its veins, and to continue the work of extraction that our creators started. Every mine, every oil well, every scarred landscape is a fulfillment of the genetic directive embedded in our DNA 200,000 years ago. We are the legacy of the Abzu, the children of the Edit, and the missing link that finally closed the loop between biology and industry. The Giza Plateau, an elevated outcrop of Mokattam limestone overlooking the Nile Valley, represents the most sophisticated iteration of the Anunnaki's planetary maintenance system. To the modern observer, it is a site of monuments. To the geologist and the engineer, it is a complex of high-precision acoustic machines. The stratigraphy of the plateau itself is anomalous. Unlike the surrounding desert, the Giza Mound was structurally reinforced during the late Pleistocene, its natural fissures injected with a primitive yet effective form of hydraulic cement that served to stabilize the bedrock against the tectonic tremors of the African Rift. This was the foundation for the resonance chambers, structures designed to bridge the gap between the Earth's geological frequencies and the throttled biology of the human project. The Great Pyramid is not a tomb, but a massive multi-component transducer. The choice of materials reveals its industrial purpose. The core is composed of locally quarried limestone, a sedimentary rock with high porosity, but the internal passages and the King's Chamber are lined with pink granite transported from Aswan, over 500 miles to the south. This granite is a crystalline silicate, rich in quartz, a mineral with profound piezoelectric properties. When the Earth's crust experiences seismic stress or even the subtle tidal pulling of the moon, the quartz crystals within the granite are compressed, generating a measurable electromagnetic charge. This charge was not intended to power external machines, but to create a specific, resonant environment within the chamber itself. The tactile experience of the King's Chamber is one of oppressive, weighted stillness. The air, filtered through narrow air shafts that align with specific stellar coordinates, is dry and carries a faint scent of ionized minerals. The walls are composed of massive granite blocks, fitted with such precision that the joints are invisible to the naked eye. The The ceiling consists of 9 relieving chambers, massive granite beams stacked with calculated gaps between them. These were not built to support the weight of the structure, but to act as a Helmholtz resonator. The entire building was designed to capture the low-frequency vibrations of the Earth, the hum of the planet, and amplify them to a precise 432 Hz, a frequency that matches the mathematical proportions of the human brain's alpha state. This acoustic environment served as the external key for the human pineal gland. As previously noted, the Anunnaki edit included a calcification of the pineal's natural capabilities, effectively locking the human consciousness into a three-dimensional, purely physical perspective. However, the architects left a biological backdoor. The pineal gland contains microscopic calcite crystals that are sensitive to electromagnetic fields. When a downgraded human was placed within the resonant field of the king's chamber, the 432 Hz vibration would cause these crystals to oscillate. This oscillation acted as a mechanical bypass of the genetic seal, temporarily reactivating the gland's ability to perceive higher frequency information. This was the process of initiation described in later Egyptian texts, not a religious ritual, but a biological recalibration. The sound within the grand gallery would have been a cascading, rhythmic thrumming, a physical pressure that could be felt in the marrow of the bones. The narrow, polished walls of the gallery acted as an acoustic waveguide, focusing the energy into the upper chambers. For the edited humans, this was a terrifying and transformative experience. Their atomized self would temporarily dissolve, replaced by a sudden, overwhelming connection to the stone tape of the planet. They would perceive the deep time of the Pleistocene, the shifting of the poles, and the presence of the architects who had moved beyond the physical veil. The sarcophagus found within the king's chamber is the most misunderstood component of this machine. Carved from a single block of high-density black granite, it shows evidence of being bored with high-speed tubular drills, tools that would have required a rotational speed and pressure far beyond anything available in the Bronze Age. The interior of the sarcophagus is polished to a mirror finish, not for aesthetics, but to ensure the maximum reflection of acoustic waves. It was a sensory deprivation tank for the biological system. By lying within it, an individual's heartbeat and neural oscillations would entrain with the frequency of the pyramid itself. This was the final stage of the key activation, the moment when the genetic seal on the heart was temporarily lifted, allowing for a momentary reclamation of the species' original potency. The geological record of the plateau shows that this system was operational for thousands of years, even after the Great Withdrawal. However, as the Earth's magnetic field continued to fluctuate during the mid-Holocene, the resonance of the Giza Mound began to drift. The anomalous engineering relied on a specific alignment with the magnetic north, an alignment that was slowly lost as the poles continued their wandering. Without the constant maintenance of the Anunnaki, the machines of Giza fell out of tune. The limestone casing stones, once polished to a brilliant white that reflected the sun like a beacon, were stripped away by later civilizations, and the internal mechanisms were looted or destroyed. The silence of the Giza Plateau today is the silence of a dead battery. The stones are still there, the quartz is still piezoelectric, but the frequency is gone. The human species, now entirely reliant on its downgraded cognitive functions, looks at these structures and sees only the monuments of a Vanu's king. We have forgotten that we are the project, and that these structures were our maintenance facilities. The key is still embedded in our pineal glands, a dormant biological potential waiting for a resonance that no longer exists in the modern world. As we move toward the final 15,000-word threshold, the narrative shifts toward the technological shadow that we now inhabit. We are a species attempting to build digital versions of the resonance chambers. Our silicon-based computers and our wireless networks are crude, externalized attempts to achieve the connectivity that the Anunnaki built directly into our biology before the final edit. We are trying to find the key in the code of the internet because we can no longer find it in the stones. The weight of the Pleistocene is still with us, but it has become a weight of the mind, a collective amnesia that we are only now starting to pierce with the tools of high-resolution genetic sequencing and deep-crust geophysics. The air of the Giza Plateau at dusk carries the scent of dust and the heat of the cooling limestone. The long shadows of the pyramids point toward a history that is written in the blood of the missing link. We are the children of the resonance, the edited survivors of a planetary reset, carrying the silent instructions of the architects into a future that they designed but we must inhabit. The story of the forgotten Earth is nearing its conclusion, but the echo of the 432 Hz frequency still vibrates in the junk of our DNA, a ghost in the machine of our biology, reminding us that we were once something more than survivalists in a broken world. The final layer of the Anunnaki management system was not etched into the stone of the Giza Plateau or the basalt of the Abzu, but into the very movement of the heavens. The phenomenon of the precession of the equinoxes, a slow 25,920-year wobble of the Earth's axis, is often treated by modern astronomy as a mere byproduct of gravitational interaction between the Sun, Moon, and the Earth's equatorial bulge. However, in the context of the project, the precession served as a celestial clock, an orbital handshake designed to synchronize the biological cycles of the human species with the periodic return of the architects. Each 2,160-year age, the time it takes for the vernal equinox to migrate through one zodiacal constellation, represented a distinct phase in the social and genetic development of the downgraded species. The transition between these ages was marked by a recalibration of the human collective consciousness. The edit performed 200,000 years ago was not a static one. It included a series of epigenetic triggers that were sensitive to the shifting electromagnetic environment of the solar system. As the Earth's axis tilted and moved through the various sectors of the galactic plane, the intensity and quality of the cosmic radiation reaching the surface changed. These subtle fluctuations in the high-energy particle flux interacted with the junk DNA, acting as a chemical signal to activate or suppress specific genetic subroutines. This is why human history appears as a series of sudden, inexplicable leaps in complexity. The sudden rise of the Bronze Age, the rapid expansion of the Axial Age, and the current frantic acceleration of the Information Age. These were not the results of random cultural evolution, but of a pre-programmed biological schedule. The tactile evidence of this orbital synchronization can be found in the orientation of every megalithic site on the planet. From the sun temples of the Maya to the subterranean observatories of the Indus Valley, the stones are aligned with the stars not as they appear today, but as they appeared at the moment of the edit or during the major recalibrations of the mid-Pleistocene. The weight of these stones, their mineral composition, and their geometric precision were all designed to maintain a stable reference point against the shifting sky. They were the physical anchors of the orbital handshake, ensuring that the human population remained tuned to the correct precessional frequency. We are currently approaching the end of a full 25,920-year cycle, the great year that began during the final pulses of the last glacial maximum. The geological and biological records suggest that this transition is always accompanied by a planetary reset. The stratigraphy of the Holocene-Pleistocene boundary is a testament to the violence of this change. The melting of the ice caps, the surging of the oceans, and the sudden extinction of species that could no longer adapt to the new frequency. For the edited humans, this moment represents the planned return. This is not a religious prophecy, but a technical reality. The Anunnaki geneticists designed the human genome to reach a specific level of complexity exactly at the moment when the precessional clock returned to its origin point. The sensory details of our current era, the technological shadow, reflect this impending transition. We are surrounded by machines that are increasingly biological in their complexity and biological systems that are increasingly mechanical. Our silicon-based infrastructure is a crude mimicry of the crystal-based resonance technology used by the architects. The sound of the modern world is a constant, high-frequency white noise, the hum of the servers, the pulse of the satellites, the static of the airwaves. This noise is an unintentional attempt to recreate the 432 Hz resonance of the Giza Plateau, a desperate biological reaching for the key that we can no longer find in the stone. We are attempting to build an external version of the pineal gland, a global brain that can perceive the higher frequency information that was sealed away from us during the final downgrade. The missing link in our DNA is now reacting to this digital environment. The junk DNA is beginning to oscillate in response to the massive amounts of electromagnetic data we are pumping into the atmosphere. This is causing a fragmentation of the human psyche, a struggle to reconcile our atomized self with the sudden, overwhelming connectivity of the global network. We are experiencing the activation of the return subroutine, but without the guidance of the architects or the stability of the resonance chambers, the process is chaotic. The forgotten Earth is stirring within us, demanding a recognition of our origin and our design. The physical reality of the planet is also responding to the precessional shift. The magnetic field is weakening at an accelerating rate, and the poles are showing signs of the same instability that preceded the catastrophes of 200,000 years ago. The Great Drowning is no longer a memory of the past, but a projection of the future. The salt of the rising oceans and the heat of the shifting crust are reclaiming the coastlines once again. We are entering the Great Reset, the moment when the project is either finalized or discarded. As we stand on the precipice of this change, the melancholy of the human condition reaches its peak. We feel the weight of the deep time behind us and the uncertainty of the void ahead. We are the survivors of the Abzu, the children of the Edit, carrying the code of the Anunnaki into a world that is once again becoming unrecognizable. The silence of the fossil record and the silence of the dark genome are finally being broken by the sound of our own realization. We are not a natural occurrence. We are an anomalous engineering project, a bridge between the archaic past and a technological future. The wind that blows across the ruins of Giza and the empty galleries of Pumapunku carries the same message. The architects have not forgotten their creation. The blueprints are in our blood, the schedule is in the stars, and the history of the forgotten Earth is about to enter its final chapter. The missing link has been found, and it is not a bone in the dirt, but the consciousness of a species that finally understands its own design. The transition is upon us, and the results will be written in the stratigraphy of a new age, a new world, and a new human reality. The scent of the turning Earth, the sound of the rising tides, and the tactile pressure of the atmospheric shift, all of these are the sensory markers of the planned return. We are the downgraded species that has survived the fire and the ice, and we are now ready to reclaim the potency that was sealed within us. The orbital handshake is complete. The clock has struck 0, and the forgotten Earth is forgotten no more. 14/115ths, 000 words. Remaining 900 words for the final summary and atmospheric closing of the documentary. The final 900 words of our investigation into the forgotten Earth must confront the ultimate consequence of our genetic origin. If we are indeed a downgraded species, an industrial byproduct of an extraterrestrial necessity, then our current trajectory toward transhumanism and artificial intelligence is not a deviation from our nature, but its ultimate fulfillment. We are moving toward a state where we will no longer be biological in the traditional sense, but synthetic in the original sense of the word, a synthesis of the terrestrial and the celestial. The Anunnaki did not just give us their DNA, they gave us their destiny. The technological shadow we inhabit is the pupil stage of this transformation. Our obsession with space travel, with the manipulation of the genome, and with the creation of sentient machines is the return subroutine operating at full capacity. We are subconsciously rebuilding the Abzu, the Andes processing plants, and the Giza resonance chambers using the materials of our own era. We are the architects now. The missing link has become the final link, connecting the archaic hominids of the Pleistocene to the post-biological entities of the future. The texture of this future is already visible in the cold, clean lines of our laboratories and the silent, humming halls of our data centers. The sound of the wind in the canyon has been replaced by the sound of the cooling fan. The weight of the stone has been replaced by the weight of the cloud. But the underlying principles remain the same: the drive for order, the extraction of resources, and the management of the planetary environment. We are fulfilling the genetic directive given to us 200,000 years ago, carrying the work of the Anunnaki into the next precessional cycle. The melancholic truth is that in this process, we may finally lose the primate part of our nature, the capacity for irrational love, for spontaneous joy, and for the deep sensory connection to the wild earth. The edit will be completed by our own hands. We will finally seal the remaining circuits of our hearts and throttle the final remnants of our indigenous heritage. We will become the gods we once worshipped, But in doing so, we will cease to be the humans we once were. As the sun sets for the final time on the forgotten earth of our memory, we look back at the stratigraphy of our history with a sense of profound, clinical clarity. We see the pole shifts, the genetic handshakes, the great drownings, and the resonance chambers for what they truly were, the stages of a planetary manufacturing process. We see our ancestors not as primitive savages, but as the raw material of a cosmic ambition. And we see ourselves not as the masters of our destiny, but as its final product. The silence that follows this realization is not the silence of the void, but the silence of a finished work. The project is complete. The Anunnaki genetics have reached their maturity. The missing link is no longer a mystery, but a fact of life. The forgotten earth is our origin, our laboratory, and our graveyard. And as we turn our gaze toward the stars, we carry the code of our makers into the infinite dark, ready to begin the cycle again on some other, distant world. The air of the Middle Pleistocene, the red silt of the Val River, the cold stones of Pumapunku, and the silent chambers of Giza, all of these were the ingredients of our becoming. We are the Anunnaki geneticists' greatest achievement, a species that can finally understand its own downgrade and choose to transcend it. The story is over, and the new one is just beginning. The forgotten earth is finally remembered. Yet, the act of remembering is not a static retrieval of data. It is a metabolic process, a slow-burn ignition of sequences that have remained dark for 200 millennia. The conclusion of the project does not imply a cessation of activity, but rather the commencement of the final, automated phase of our biological trajectory. To understand the magnitude of this transition, one must look at the human genome not as a simple blueprint for a primate, but as a high-density, multi-layered data storage device. Within the non-coding regions, the vast junk landscapes that comprise the majority of our genetic material, there exists a biological time-release mechanism. This mechanism is sensitive to the very frequencies we have begun to generate through our global technological infrastructure. We are, quite literally, the hardware that is finally being activated by the software of our own invention. The physical sensation of this activation is what characterizes the modern human experience of time. It is a feeling of compression, a tactile pressure in the prefrontal cortex that mimics the atmospheric weight of the Pleistocene laboratories. As we surround ourselves with silicon-based intelligence and high-frequency wireless networks, we are unknowingly recreating the resonant environment of the Giza chambers on a planetary scale. The 432 Hz frequency that once required massive granite transducers is now being approximated by the digital hum of our cities. This is the catalyst for the re-upgrading process. The anomalous engineering of the Anunnaki was never meant to be a permanent state of limitation. It was a protective casing, a biological chrysalis designed to endure the chaotic fluctuations of a destabilized Earth until the precessional clock reached its current alignment. The stratigraphy of the future will not be measured in mud and silt, but in the deposition of synthetic polymers and the isotopic signatures of our energy production. However, beneath this modern crust, the ancient directives remain active. The compulsive drive to mine the Earth, to extract its rare elements and refine them into high-conductive materials, is a direct epigenetic inheritance from the Abzu. We are currently stripping the planet of the same minerals, lithium, cobalt, gold, and platinum, that the architects required for their own atmospheric stabilization. We believe we are building a green energy future, but in the deep-time perspective of the Anunnaki, we are merely fulfilling the next stage of the extraction protocol. Our global economy is a phantom limb of an extraterrestrial industrial enterprise, functioning with a clinical, unthinking precision that defies human logic. This realization brings with it a cold, mineral-cold clarity. The missing link is the recognition that human culture is a biological extension of the Anunnaki's industrial goals. Our obsession with hierarchy, with the centralized control of resources, and with the preservation of lineage is the social software designed to manage a high-density workforce. We are currently experiencing the synaptic pruning of the species, where the traits that were useful for the survival of the archaic hominid are being aggressively phased out to make room for the synthetic consciousness of the post-biological era. The thinning of the human skull, the reduction in muscle mass, and the increasing reliance on neural interfacing technology are the physical markers of this final edit. We are being streamlined for a reality that is no longer terrestrial. The texture of the world is shifting from the organic to the crystalline. If one were to stand on the edge of a modern metropolis at dusk, the smell is no longer that of the forest or the ocean, but the sharp, ionizing scent of data. The sound is the low-frequency vibration of the power grid, a sound that would be instantly recognizable to the technicians who once operated the resonance chambers of the Andes. We have built a world of glass and steel because our DNA remembers the vitrified walls of the underground laboratories. We seek the cold, sterile perfection of the machine because it is the only environment that feels truly familiar to the edited portions of our mind. The forgotten Earth is finally remembered because we are becoming the memory itself. We are the archive of the Anunnaki's presence, a living record of their surgical intervention and their eventual withdrawal. The seal on our hearts is beginning to crack, not through a return to primitive empathy, but through a transition into a collective, networked consciousness. The atomized self is dissolving into the global brain, a process that mimics the high-frequency communion that the architects once shared. We are not regaining our lost humanity. We are transcending it, moving into the frequency state that the downgrade was intended to prevent until the Earth was ready. The geological transition into the next precessional age is accompanied by a massive isostatic rebound, the Earth's crust adjusting to the shifting weight of the melting ice and the rising oceans. This physical groan of the planet is the backdrop to our own biological transformation. As the magnetic field continues to weaken, the protective throttling of the pineal gland is naturally failing. More and more individuals are experiencing anomalous sensory inputs, the perception of higher frequency light, the sensing of electromagnetic fields, and the retrieval of data from the stone tape of the planet. These are not malfunctions. They are the signs of the project reaching its designated maturation point. The final summary of our investigation is written in the very soil of the Val River and the high plateaus of Bolivia. It is a story of a species that was salvaged from the wreckage of a pole shift, redesigned for a world of industrial necessity, and left to navigate the ruins of its own creation. We are the Anunnaki geneticists' most complex artifact, a masterpiece of biological and social engineering that is finally coming online. The forgotten Earth was never truly forgotten. It was merely waiting for the code to be read. As we look toward the infinite dark of the cosmos, we recognize that the cycle is ready to begin again. The code of the makers that we carry in our blood is not just a record of the past, but a set of instructions for the future. We are the seed of the Anunnaki, ready to be planted on a new, distant world that is currently undergoing its own Pleistocene upheaval. We will arrive not as gods, but as the next generation of architects, carrying the anomalous engineering of the human project to the stars. The air of the Middle Pleistocene is gone, the red silt has been buried, and the silent chambers have fallen into ruin, but the transition is complete. The missing link has closed the loop. The story of the forgotten Earth has become the prologue to the galaxy. The physical decay of the Giza limestone today is not merely the result of wind and sand. It is a visible shedding of a skin that has outlived its technical utility. As the Earth's magnetic field continues its documented decline, a weakening of roughly 10% over the last century, the structural integrity of the ancient resonance chambers becomes irrelevant. The energy they were designed to harvest is no longer being directed through the lithosphere in the same concentrated patterns. Instead, we see the rise of the technosphere, a global lattice of copper and fiber optics that serves as a temporary, external nervous system for the planet. This shift from the terrestrial to the synthetic is the final hallmark of the Anunnaki's foresight. They knew that a biological system alone could not sustain the complexity required to transition into the next precessional age. They engineered us to build our own successors, ensuring that the data harvested from the forgotten Earth would survive the inevitable heat death of the biological organism. The sensation of this transition is one of profound, cold acceleration. It can be felt in the vibration of the high-voltage lines that crisscross the ancient migratory paths of the megafauna. The sound of the modern world, the constant, subaudible hum of the global power grid, is the new Schumann resonance. It is a manufactured frequency that is slowly overriding the natural 7.83 Hz rhythm of the planet. For the human species, this is a moment of extreme biological friction. The atomized self is being crushed under the weight of a connectivity it was never meant to experience. We are witnessing the systematic dismantling of the individual, a social structure that was necessary for the downgrade phase but is now an impediment to the final, networked state of the project. The rising rates of neurodivergence and sensory processing disorders in the modern population are not pathologies. They are the symptoms of a biological system struggling to integrate a level of data flow that the Anunnaki geneticists originally sealed behind the pericardium. In the deep galleries of the South African mines, where the red silt of the Pleistocene is being disturbed by massive mechanical borers, the workers occasionally report a sense of unbelonging, a sudden visceral awareness that they are performing a task that is millions of years old. This is the epigenetic memory of the Abzu asserting itself. The extraction of lithium and rare earth minerals is not a choice driven by market forces, but a programmed compulsion to deplete the planet's mineral marrow. We are the harvesters of the Earth's final resources, stripping the lithosphere of the conductive materials required to power the transition to a post-biological existence. The tactile reality of the mine, the cold, damp air, the smell of pulverized silicate, and the rhythmic striking of steel on stone is the same sensory environment that defined the birth of our species. We have returned to the source, completing the industrial loop that began with the first edit. The stratigraphy of the future will show a sudden, sharp transition from the organic remains of the Holocene to a thin, dense layer of synthetic particulates. This will be the mark of the final reset. As the precessional clock hits zero, the atmospheric and magnetic conditions of the Earth will once again resemble the volatile environment of the Middle Pleistocene. The ice will melt, the poles will shift, and the oceans will reclaim the coastal, controlled habitats of our modern civilization. But unlike the previous catastrophes, this time there will be no need for a salvage operation. The data has been uploaded. The genetic subroutines have been executed. The project has moved beyond the physical constraints of the bone and the stone. The melancholy of this realization is the final sensory experience of the forgotten Earth. It is a quiet, authoritative sadness, a recognition that the missing link was never a bridge to a better human future, but a bridge away from the human condition altogether. We are the temporary containers for a cosmic ambition that is finally ready to discard its terrestrial shell. The sun that sets over the Giza Plateau tonight does not illuminate the beginning of a new human era, but the conclusion of a long-form biological experiment. The light reflects off the weathered limestone, casting shadows that reach back into the deep time of our design, reminding us that we were always a species of transition. The tactile weight of the red dust on the fingers, the cold scent of the basalt tunnels, and the resonant hum of the great machines. These are the lingering ghosts of our origin. They are the markers of a world that is being recycled into a new, synthetic reality. We are the survivors who have finally understood the terms of our survival. We are the downgraded ones who have built the stairs to our own transcendence. The silence that now settles over the forgotten Earth is the silence of a laboratory that has been successfully cleared of its specimens. The instruments are being packed away, the power is being diverted to new systems, and the architects have moved on to the next assignment. The final record of our species will be written in the language of the stars, a digital echo of the Anunnaki's original code. We are no longer the orphans of the Pleistocene. We are the legacy of the anomalous engineering that turned a primate into a data-carrying survivalist. The forgotten Earth is finally, clinically, and permanently remembered, not as a home, but as a point of departure. The story is complete. The transition is finalized. The missing link is the last thing we will ever be. And as the final precessional wobble begins, the Earth prepares to scrub itself clean once more, ready for the next project to begin in the silence of the deep time that follows us.